Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to another Facebook Live from Alzheimer's Orange County. My name is Melissa Clabe. I'm the Director of Education here at ALS-OC, and I'm joined again by the lovely Kim Bailey, one of our Programs and Education Specialists. Hi, Kim.
Hi, good morning, Melissa. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. All right, so today we're going to be kind of going back to basics. Our original kind of class called Caring Conversations. It's about connecting and communicating with loved ones or neighbors or friends with memory loss, and just kind of some tried and true strategies and a framework for thinking about the changes they're experiencing and how we can adapt to that. Before we dive in, I want to thank our wonderful sponsor, Caring Companions at Home, for this month's, all of this month's Facebook Live sessions. They are committed to providing seniors with quality in-home care. Their care is personalized and affordable. And I love their kind of four-step process. They have case manager home visits to assess needs. They do a plan of care with all their services written out. They have a caregiver matching process in order to choose the best fit. And then they have periodic visits after that to make sure that the care is, the best it can be, and to modify anything that needs changing. So if you're interested in learning more about them, please visit Caring Companions at Home. Again, we are so thankful for their sponsorship for many months of this Facebook Live education. And we could not do this without them. So thank you, Caring Companions. And let me put this up for a second here. So Kim, so this class, we teach it all the time, but you and I were just talking before this about the reason we teach it all the time is because it's so important. And it's one of the hardest things, I think, that personally I can speak to as a caregiver that was hard for me to adapt to. Because it just requires really a change in mindset and a change in approach that is much easier said than done. We are all human, we all get frustrated. Especially in stressful times like we're living in right now, trying to stay calm and have our wits about us is really difficult, especially when we're caring for someone who is experiencing really big changes in their memory and their cognitive ability. And so all these things I've done, and I'm sure people out there also, and I always tell this story, but the first class I ever went to many, many years before I ever worked for ALS-OC, and when I was just starting to care for my mom, I remember getting this list of things and feeling like, oh, I'm doing all the things on the wrong side of this list.
Right.
Do you want to talk about how common that is?
Sure. It's so interesting. As you said, we've been teaching this class for many years, and I always feel kind of bad because a lot of our attendees will mention that they feel guilty because they see the list and they go, oh my gosh, I'm doing everything wrong. And I always just want to take this magic wand and wave it over their heads and remove all the guilt, because this is not easy. When we're talking about a new way, it's a new way of talking because it represents a paradigm shift. And so, when you're caring for the person you love, you've been communicating with them pretty much the same way for a period of many years. And so now we're going to talk about a new way of talking, and it really, consists of a new, operating in a new reality. And so that's tough stuff. And so as we have this discussion this morning, and for some of you, you've heard it before, and for some of you, this is new, but don't beat yourself up. And, there's always room for improvement. And, as we go forward, even if you just adopt some of the changes, just a couple of the changes we talk about today, it's going to result in a more positive outcome. And that's what we're looking for here, right? We're looking for more good days than bad. And, we're looking for smooth roads ahead as opposed to rough roads ahead. So some of the things we'll talk about today are just easy little changes that we can make. And all of you are doing such a terrific job under very difficult circumstances. So just pause for a minute and realize that you're doing a great job, and we just want to help you just make it even better.
Absolutely. So let's go through each of these a little bit, because I think each of them yeah, deserves a little bit of attention. Starting with the first one, reasoning.
Yes.
So, and I always remember, I don't know if it's you or Ben that always says this, but do you want to be happy or do you want to be right? And I think
Right.
that's such an interesting and important kind of phrase to keep in our heads. Just
Yep.
think, because it's so natural to want to reason with someone that we've,
Yep.
done this with, probably someone we've known our whole life. For me,
Yeah.
it's my mom. For a lot of people, it's their partner. You're kind of used to that back and forth, and like,
Yeah.
you know,
And it's
so
natural to want to be right.
yeah,
An example just popped into my brain. The person who I cared for many years, uh, and some of you have heard this example before, but I remember she got angry with me one day and said, "I don't feel well, and I haven't eaten all day. You haven't fed me." And I immediately started telling her, "Of course I fed you." And I started on this long list of things that I'd fed her. I said, "I made you pancakes this morning, and then we had fresh fruit for a snack, and then I made you fresh tuna salad." And I'm going on and on, trying to reason with a person who had a brain impairment. Now, if you just step back for a second and think about, the logic behind that, there is no logic. And so, as those of you who are online with us think about this, what's wrong with my approach there? And where did I go wrong? Because I can tell you what happened. She got mad. She got angry with me. And why do you think she was angry? And
because yeah, that's not her reality, right?
she was angry because I was reminding her that she was forgetting and she was embarrassed. And so there's a very simple way that I should have responded. And the first thing I should have done is just take a deep breath and remind myself that I'm dealing with someone who's confused. And then I should have apologized and said, "I'm so sorry I haven't fed you. Let me make you a bite to eat." And then, none of what ended up happening would have happened. I mean, the story would have had this really simple, happy ending. And so we always want to just, we need to stop trying to reason with people who are dealing with a brain impairment. End of story. Right, Melissa?
Absolutely. And the next one definitely feeds into that as well, arguing or confronting. I mean, it's such a human thing to do again in the moment, when someone is saying something that may be very untrue.
And
Or,
they, and they
yeah,
do say things that aren't true.
right.
And that is the reality of Alzheimer's disease and other memory impairments. They operate from a base of confusion. And so, what we have to remember when they're saying things that aren't true is that the things they say are their truth.
Right.
And it's not up to us to reason with them or to argue with them or to confront them. We're going to go with the flow and we're going to validate what they're saying. And it just makes life so much calmer and so much easier for them. And okay, guess what? For us as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's one comment here that says, I always loved when you told me you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Same, same here. Absolutely. And Vicky says it takes a lot of patience, lots of deep breaths, and just agreeing. Yes. Agreeing is one of the best things we can do. One of the hardest in certain situations and when tensions are high. But just always kind of having in mind, how can I bring this down? How can I de-escalate this? And usually
Exactly.
arguing and confronting are not the way that we would go about bringing a situation back down to a calmer level. And when your tensions are high, their tensions are going to be high. You're going to feed off of each other. It's going to be this
Right.
escalating situation and could eventually escalate to a dangerous situation, and we definitely don't want that. We want
Right.
things to stay as calm as possible. So
Yeah.
reasoning, arguing, and confronting. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, just need to step back and think for a minute and do a little bit of instant planning in our head about what is our goal here. Our goal is to be happy, not to be right. And I think part of it is just like ego driven too, Melissa,
Oh,
because
yes.
when my person would say, "You haven't fed me," I mean, that kind of struck at my heart, like I'm wanting to be this perfect caregiver and, you know, of course, I wanted to prepare perfect meals for her, and so it sort of attacked me. I felt attacked personally. You can't be defensive as a caregiver, and we don't get a lot of feedback. We don't get a lot of positive feedback, and so that's kind of painful as well. But you just have to remember, if they were able to compliment us and give us that great feedback, they would, but they can't because of their diagnosis. So all of these things that we experience that are painful are as a result of the diagnosis, and they're out of that person's control. So,
Reminding, this one is so tough. Don't you remember? Do you remember me? Don't you remember her? Don't they'll ask, oh, I miss so and so, I haven't seen them. Don't you remember? We just saw them 5 minutes ago. It's like that. And Teepa Snow says, say the word remember, now spit it out and throw it away and don't say it anymore. And again, I love that, but that's easier said than done, right? I mean, it's like, what is it about that we just can't help ourselves? I probably for the first few years of my, and I think it's this mix of wanting to be right and this ego thing, and then also desperately trying to get her to stay with me in this moment and not, like wanting her to remember and, almost like a quiz, like, well, do you still remember my name, or do you still remember this? And almost wanting to assess, and Ben always says it feels like a quiz. And nobody likes taking quizzes.
Exactly.
And so that defensiveness is going to come out.
Yeah, I mean, this disease is so tough. And, for so long, people look normal, and, we're used to looking at people the way we always have, and we have those same expectations. And it's so difficult to dial it back and to realize that people have changed. And, and it's hard to see that because we see them every day. And, so it's tough. It's really tough. And, but yeah, questioning people and quizzing them. I think that sometimes as caregivers, we think that's helping them with their cognition, but all it's doing is really putting them on the spot and making them uncomfortable. And again, that's going to build that anxiety and, maybe escalate to a behavior. So we're going to do everything we can to avoid behaviors, right?
Yeah. And we can talk about some strategies for kind of rewording the remember this, almost even if you're wanting to reminisce with someone, I think, and I'll wait till we get to kind of some better strategies to talk about that. Remind me if I forget. But I want to read a couple comments that came in. Thank you, Crystal. We need to be more mindful of how we respond to them. Vicky, I have to remove my pride and humble myself, knowing my mom struggling to keep her identity. Crystal, sometimes they feel attacked and don't know why. These are all, I agree completely. We have to be so mindful of, our approach. And again, easier said than done. This is almost, years long, if not a lifetime process of continuing to kind of adapt, and knowing your person is just the most important thing, and knowing, how they're going to respond to what you're going to say. So reminding, questioning recent memory. I guess I kind of mix these two up a little bit, but similar, right? Do you remember? Don't you remember? And if they don't remember, then reminding them. These kind of go hand in hand. So, I don't.
Yeah, I mean, quizzing people is not advised, but giving them little prompts and little cues. It's just a different way to look at it. Instead of saying, do you remember who this is? Or do you remember who I am? Just give them that. Give it to them. Just say, hey, it's Kim. I'm so happy to be here today. Or look, it's your son, Michael. Aren't you glad to see him? Give them that information so that they can save face.
Absolutely.
So it's a world of difference in how you set things up for them to make it easier for them to be successful. So we want everything we do to be as failure-free as possible. So
and it's perfect what you said. That sets the tone for the whole interaction. If you start off saying, do you remember me? Or, bringing some relative, don't you remember, so-and-so, that sets the interaction off just from a negative place, because likely they're going to be defensive, or they're going to feel like they need to kind of make something up, or, oh yeah, I
Taking
remember
it.
so and so, rather than just kind of approaching exactly as you said, just stating who you are or who this person is or what you're about to go do, even if you've said it 10 other times. Just really saving face. That's the perfect way of putting it.
Yeah.
Jen says, I think it's important to remember they're still human. Absolutely. I mean, nobody wants to feel like they're being questioned. If someone says, is questioning my memory, and I'm pretty confident that my memory is pretty good, I get defensive,
Is.
or I get worried, oh my gosh, am I forgetting things? And so just at every opportunity, just making sure that we are treating them the way that, we would want to be treated, or our loved one would want to be treated in that situation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So the last one here, take it personally. I
Oh
say
boy.
everyone is the hardest one, but maybe this one is actually the hardest one.
It is. It is, Melissa. As I said earlier, you're not getting the kudos and the thanks that one would expect for doing such a hard job, such a tough job. But that if they were able, they would extend those thanks to you. And it's difficult not to become defensive because you're exhausted all the time. So developing that thick skin is really critical, and it's hard. It really is hard. But do the best you can, and the best way to avoid taking it personally is to take care of yourself, since you're in the trenches, you're doing this tough work, you're not getting the thanks that you need, so you have to thank yourself. So we talk about self-care a lot, and it's never been more important than now in the time of COVID. So carving out that little space for you to take good care of yourself is really critical. So I hope that all of you are finding the time and the space to do that, because it's so important.
Absolutely. So I love this quote. Validating someone's expression says, it's your right to feel the way you do without judgment or blame. And that's tough too. But I think, the first step in our communication with someone, especially if they're maybe saying something to us that we feel attacked or it's not true, that is their reality. And dismissing it or rejecting it, denying it, that is not going to change the fact that what they are experiencing is their reality. And so I think we often skip this step and try to go straight to distracting or diverting. But really, if we don't take that initial step to validate what they're saying, and so that they feel truly heard,
Right.
not just like, oh yeah, we all know when we're getting the brush off. They know it too. That doesn't go away, and maybe even they're more in tune to it because they're kind of becoming more emotional as their cognition changes. So they know when they're not being kind of heard or listened to.
Right.
I think those can be two different things. So finding ways to make sure they feel heard. And Dr. Galindo talks a lot about a lot of things they may be saying may come from a place of fear or anxiety, not knowing what's going on, being in that constant state of confusion. And so, making sure that we are hearing the emotions behind what they're saying, even if what they're saying might not make sense to us, kind of trying to be a little more in tune and say, okay, is this coming from a place of fear or loneliness? And what can I do to validate that? I want to go home. Maybe it doesn't mean a specific place. Maybe they are in their home, or maybe they're just seeking a place that feels like home, and where they are doesn't feel like that. So instead of saying you are home or you can't go home, sounds like you're missing your home. Tell me about that. Or, why don't you sit with me, and really being with that person and kind of being in tune to the emotion behind what they're saying. And then, going from a place of that, so how can we get to somewhere that is a more positive place? How should we change, kind of slowly change the topic of conversation, or go for a walk, or do something else? But skipping that validating step, I think, is a mistake that we all make. And it's worth kind of hammering on this right now. Anything you want to add to that?
Just, you can't overstate the importance of it, because, their emotions are amplified, and there's a swirl of them, and they're not able to control them. And they're very close to the surface all the time, and they can change, quickly. And so, yes, validating them. When you see changes in behavior, you've got to really tap into what is the underlying emotion. And as you said, a lot of times it's fear or they're not feeling safe, or they're not feeling loved, they're not feeling needed, or they're not feeling like they're productive anymore. And so, sort of tapping into that and addressing that is important. And then too, watching your own emotions is important because they often mirror those. And then I'll add on there too, taking some responsibility, even if you're not responsible for their emotions, is important. So saying you're sorry, even if you didn't do anything wrong, can go a long way, because a lot of times they're angry and they're angry at you and it's not your fault. And instead of getting defensive or starting down that path of reasoning and telling them why it's not your fault, makes it worse. It's going to grow and escalate, and then they might have even a catastrophic reaction. Just tell them you're sorry and tell them you'll try harder, you'll do better. And then do that skillful, redirecting or distraction into a favorite activity or down the path of talking about a more pleasant subject if you're able. So, I mean, it takes practice. It's not easy, but sometimes that can help to de-escalate things. But the first step is validation of these emotions and reassurance. Someone isn't feeling safe and they're scared, you've got to reassure them and hug them and make them feel safe, right? That's the very first step.
Absolutely. Perfect. So, all right. So we talked about things that we typically may do, especially in the heat of the moment. Yeah. So what are things we can try instead? So do you want to start us off with this first one, repeating?
Yeah, so, I mean, a really common behavior, and people who haven't been caregivers don't understand just how crazy making this is, but is the repetition. So, when people are on a loop and they're repeating the same question or the same statement over and over again, that's really frustrating to caregivers. And so, this is one of the classic scenarios where people are asking the same question: what time is the doctor appointment, or what time is lunch? And it just goes on and on and on, and then you just want to snap. And so, it's very common for someone to just say, I've told you this 10 times, quit asking me. And if that's you, then congratulations, you're normal. Because this is tough. But what my suggestion of what you could try instead is just keep repeating the answer. And don't just skip out on that whole I've already told you this, because they really can't control this. I mean, they repeat because the part of the brain that saves that information is broken. I mean, it's just absolutely broken. So they seriously can't control that. So when you tell them that they're going to the doctor at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and they ask you every 10 minutes up until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they can't control that. And by the way, don't make appointments at 2. Make them at 9 a.m. Right? That might
Absolutely.
So yeah,
and I think
it's common and it's out of their control. And so they're going to repeat questions. You're going to have to repeat the answers. You can use some devices like putting things on whiteboards, or Post-its. Sometimes that can help, but repetition is just kind of part and parcel of this disease. And it kind of leads into number 2. They might get mad because you didn't tell them they had a doctor appointment at 2 o'clock. And then you want to say, well, I've told you 15 million times, but you can't. You have to accept the blame, like I was just saying, and apologize. I'm so sorry I forgot to tell you. But I'm telling you now, so let's go ahead and get your purse, and it's time to go. If you really start to feel like you just want to blow, do it in another room and do it quietly. It's okay to step back and step away. And Dr. Galindo, who does so many of our talks about how effective deep breathing is. And it really is. It's, it's essential to just sort of gathering yourself. and slowing your heart rate and de-escalating your own emotions. And so it's okay to step away and take a few minutes to center yourself. And then I mentioned distraction. It's a tool in your caregiver tool belt that's very effective. When things start to go south or you start to see agitation or behaviors emerging, you can validate, reassure, and then skillfully use distraction to move that person onto a different path. They do have a very limited attention span, generally speaking. And so if you can think of a favorite activity, in other sessions, we've talked about using contented involvement, which really is just talking about a state where people are engaged and involved in something that brings them to a state of contentment. So we want to have some of those activities on hand during these tough times so that people can be redirected into these activities.
Absolutely. And I think that the last one, using distraction, can be really helpful for the first one, which is repetition. And I think it's kind of circling back to that, looking at the reason why they might be repeating. And it oftentimes just an artifact of a short-term memory and remembering that you said something about a doctor's appointment, but then not knowing, when exactly that is, and do I need to be getting ready? And maybe it's some kind of form of anxiety. And so, can we engage in an activity before that? Or can we go for a walk? Or should I wait to tell them a little bit, so that all morning we're not asking about the doctor's appointment? And again, this comes from knowing that person, or maybe they're excited. Maybe you told them, hey, your sister's coming over later, and they're very excited to see her. And so they keep asking about it, but then it leads to you getting frustrated. So there may be different things you can try, different engaging in different activities. The whiteboard's a great suggestion. It always, people always say, well, what kinds of reminder tools can I use? And it really depends on the abilities of the person and what they will, respond to. So there's not like a one size fits all, and something might work for a little bit and then not work after that. And we just kind of have to keep adapting. So
adapting is something that you have to do on a continual basis. And, kind of trying to stay one step ahead of the disease as it progresses is important as well. So absolutely. But yeah.
One comment from Vicki: what has helped us, the use of a whiteboard to put dates or reminders. Absolutely. So I mean, that worked for us for a big period of time. We would write, today is Tuesday, and we're having this for lunch, or we're going here. And that was super helpful. And then we can kind of redirect her to the board, and she would kind of like study the board and read it over and over again. And that was fine. And for a time, and then, she wasn't interested in that anymore after a period of time. And so we kind of moved on from that. But definitely trying different things, no harm in that. Absolutely. And then Jen says, as caregivers, carers, we must get used to the repetition. Absolutely. Kind of just making it something that's part of our day, part of our, will maybe lessen our frustration or agitation that we feel. And we're human. We're going to feel, frustrated and on edge, with someone constantly repeating things, if that's where they're at. But just accepting that it's part of our lives, at least for this period of time. And it won't always be like that. We go through different stages as the disease progresses. Fortunately and unfortunately, whatever stage you're in, it's not forever. There will be changes. So it's good to understand that. And as well as you've talked a bit about behaviors that we see, or distress, as I like to call it. And we have to understand that as we're talking about communication, those are all forms of communication, right? Yeah. Maybe they don't have the words to describe what they're feeling. And so it comes out in aggravation or something we'd see as agitation. And we also have to understand that that is a form of communication, and try and put our detective hat on and see, what are they trying to tell us? How can I validate that? And then move on. Same as if it was words, if it was actions.
I really like the way you call it distress as opposed to behaviors, because I really don't like that word behavior.
Me either.
They're being bad, and they're not. Right. They're not. They're just trying to get across some sort of a message to us, and it's incumbent upon us as their caregivers to interpret what the message is. because they really are speaking a different language now. So.
Absolutely. Would you take us through the compassionate approach?
Sure. So, when we're talking about wanting to communicate with people, what we're really talking about goes beyond language. It's really about a connection. We're wanting to connect with them. And as the disease progresses, it's really not about the words so much as it's a nonverbal approach. But, whether we're connecting through language or through nonverbal, we want to really sort of set the stage for success. And so here are just a few tips for that. First of all, we're wanting to make a connection with the person that we're caring for. We want to be aware of the environment around us. Is it noisy? Is it overstimulating? We want to try to, calm it down, sort of, make it a little Zen-like. I know for a lot of older adults in their homes, it seems like there's always TVs blaring all the time, and I really don't like that, especially now in the time of COVID. All the news is bad, so I prefer like nice soft music, their music playing. And, if there's a lot of traffic outside their house and, we don't need to look at that. Anyway, just calm down the environment, adjust our own approach. We want to, when we're approaching a person with dementia and we want to make a connection with them, we want to make sure we're at their eye level. We don't want to get too up close and personal, especially now in the time of COVID, but their interpretation of space is different than ours. Their spatial is different. If we approach them too closely, they may interpret that as we're towering over them, or we may appear to be a threat. So we want to have nice, open body language. We always have our best smile, and just have that really calm, smiling countenance, that really nice affect. And our voice and our tone is important. We're speaking slowly, not so slowly that it sounds like we're talking down to them, but just slowly and simply. And we want to really facilitate that great connection. So, we can make that great connection before we ever even say a word. And that we start to build that trust with them and facilitate that great connection, just all in our approach. And then when we're having that conversation, we want to be a good listener. We need to allow a lot of time, because remember, they need time to process what we're saying. And language goes both ways. We need to give them time to speak. We need to give them time to take in what we're saying. We don't interrupt because they can easily lose their train of thought. And we really, just overall, this is sort of a broad goal, this last one. We want to always, in our interactions with people living with Alzheimer's or another type of memory impairment, focus on their remaining skills. And so, yes, it's true that these illnesses ultimately take away so much from the people that we're caring for, but there's so much that remains. And for a very long time, people remain healthy typically and are able to do many of the things they love. They just are not able to initiate a lot of these things, but they can with our help. And so people don't lose the essence of who they are. Alzheimer's and other memory impairments can't take away the core essence of who people are. And so we can tap into those things, maybe not always through speech, but through art and through music and through our love for them and our love for one another. And so I'm just a big fan of looking at people and recognizing them for who they are and who they always were. And so, let's just remember that, because people have gifts and talents and skills that are long held, that cannot be stolen away from them, even in the face of this illness. And so let's really always try to pull those talents and strengths into their day-to-day life. Even if they have to, if they can be incorporated into activities that might be simplified, but they still reflect the essence and soul and very nature of that person. And so I encourage everyone to remember to do that.
Beautifully said. That you mentioned earlier that when we were talking about the needs that may be present, that we have to kind of tune it, that need to be needed, that need to be loved, that doesn't go away ever. And so, being able to, involve that person. I remember, I would say things like, oh, mom, it's time to do this. Wasn't really too keen on that. If I would say, hey, can you help me with this? Always would rarely say no, no matter what it is. So it's kind of a nice thing I could always kind of have in my back pocket if we needed to go somewhere or do something in the bathroom. But I just remember how, immediately, yes, of course I'll help you. You need my help, and especially as my mom wanting to, always be needed. And then the other thing I was going to mention, that something that Ben always says is smile with your voice, which I love. I love that sentiment of smiling with your voice, especially because we know the words don't matter as much as we kind of go along this journey. It's really our body language and our tone, which you talked about, that matter. It's like body language and tone make up more than 90% of our communication. The words are 7% or something, from this UCLA study. But yeah, I wholeheartedly believe that. And the words are what they're losing. And so that body language and tone becomes paramount. So important to smile with our voice, to smile with our face. And just this gentle approach, everything about it. So thank you for taking us through this. I want to take us through one example scenario. If anybody else has examples, feel free to share them in the chat box. But this is such a common one, I think, that we hear a lot, just, that thinking back to a previous time, maybe when they felt like they had something they need to do, pick up the kids from school. I'm leaving now. It's time for me to pick up the kids. And say, what do we say in response? And so we have a couple responses here. Hopefully by now we can both pick out kind of the better response and the less desirable response. But, in a prior time, I might have said, what? I'm your kid. I'm not in school. Your kids are grown. They're not in school anymore. So that's kind of all those things we talked about in one, reminding, arguing, or confronting, and where is that going to take that encounter? Probably not in the direction that we want to see it go, which is happiness, a positive place, place of calmness, because their reality is it's 4:00. I got to go pick up the kids from school. So why don't you take us through a better approach?
So instead, you could say, well, it sounds like you're missing your kids. Why don't you tell me a little bit about them? How about you tell me about them over a cup of tea, or maybe we'll take a walk. So here's where you're validating. In this response, you're validating, but then you're also doing that redirecting, that distracting and redirecting. I mean, you could also just say, let's look at some pictures. I mean, there's myriad things you could do. Anything would be better than, what? I'm your kid and I'm, 55 years old and I'm not in school anymore. Oh, but Melissa, if it were you, it would be, I'm 30, whatever you are. Anything's better than confronting them with the reality that they've just made a huge mistake. So, yeah.
Exactly.
The woman I cared for would say, where's my husband at night? She'd say, where's my husband? And I'd say, oh, well, he's not here. I'm sorry. And she'd say, well, can we call him? And I'd say, or no, she'd say, he's not. I'd say, he's not here. And she'd say, well, where is he? And I'd say, he's on a business trip. Because that was something that he often did. He often traveled. And then she'd say, well, let's call him. And I'd say, well, we can call him. Let's call him in the morning because right now it's really late. So I'm going to get you some warm milk and then we'll call him in the morning. And that generally worked. But again, it's like anything but, I'm sorry, your husband passed away 15 years ago. So, right. Yeah.
I love this quote. We'll kind of wrap it up here with this. Just two different ways of seeing things, right? He's confused because he has dementia. I think that's kind of the place we often come from and say, they are confused, right? I mean, that's the truth. But there is a different way that we can look at it to foster better communication. And that is, I'm confused because I don't understand what he's trying to tell me yet. And so I think looking at it this way just sets us up in a place to be curious, which is something we should always try to be, and figure out, what are they trying to tell us? Their language, their communication style is changing. They still have the ability to communicate, whether it's through words or actions. And so we need to just kind of be good detectives, and we should but you have to come from a place of thinking that what they're saying or doing is communication and not just purposeless and meaningless. But if we come from a place of, there is some need in there that I need to just kind of put my thinking hat on and figure out what it is, rather than just dismissing it as confusion and there's nothing, to be done here, that will change, not just that interaction, but the entire relationship going forward. So I love this quote. Again, all of this easier said than done. I'll read a comment here from Vicky. My mom continues to ask us to take her home. It can be challenging to come up with different reasons as to why she can't go home. And I touched on that a little bit. This physician, actually, who I quote here, talks a lot in his books about that very common phrase or question, I want to go home, can I go home? And talks about it a lot from, as I mentioned before, not necessarily that they're looking for a physical place, although they might be, but tapping into that emotion of wherever I am doesn't feel like home for some reason. And so how can we make that environment feel like home? And that's going to be different for every person. And maybe it is a certain, physical features, or maybe it's a feeling of loneliness or fear as security that we need to approach from a different way. Kim, do you have any other thoughts on this?
I mean, maybe, have you tried just saying, that's a great idea, but we're not able to travel now. Why don't we plan a trip for fall?
Yeah, there's really no end to the kind of approaches that we could take at this time. But I think too, coming from a place of validating, and not just saying, if they are home, you are home. Because that might not mean much if they don't feel like they're home, or if they're not in their home, maybe they're in a care community or something like that. Not saying we can't go home. Maybe couching it in a way that you suggested. But I think really tapping into why they might be asking that question and what are they missing where they are. Are they missing you? Are they missing, maybe it is as simple as they're missing a certain thing. So maybe asking, tell me about your home, or what are you missing right now about your home? And that could actually clue you into something that you didn't even think of. There's just all sorts of approaches, and it is tough because, they might be asking that question or saying that statement for a long time, and you might just have to try different things at different times, and it is heartbreaking. I know that. But there are definitely phrases and approaches we could try. Yeah, Vicky says, we've been saying it's not safe with COVID, and yeah, totally. I mean, if that's working for you, definitely keep going with it. But no harm in trying maybe a little reminiscence. Let's look, do we have some pictures of maybe it's a childhood home they're thinking of, maybe it's not even their current home. It could be anything. And so just thinking really outside the box about different, things that we can do. And again, validating, and then kind of maybe moving on. Changing the subject. Can we go for a walk? Can we do one of your favorite activities? I think that's definitely a tried and true thing. And noticing when they're asking. Is it a certain time of day always? And when are they not asking? Are they engaged in an activity that's purposeful? Are they feeling content in another way? And trying to make more of the day that way as much as possible. I think we always tune into what's happening when a certain distress happens. But I think just noting when they're calm and happy and positive, and taking a snapshot of that environment and saying, how can we reproduce this all day long if we can? I think that'll hopefully give you some answers too.
Good luck with that.
Thank you guys for commenting on and for your questions. That's great. So we do want to let you know of a couple upcoming things. We have tons of classes coming up, all on our website, alzoc.org. But we especially wanted to note these two. We have a Savvy Caregiver series coming up this month. I was going to say next month, but it definitely is August. So that's soon. It's a 3-week series, and we will do it again if this time doesn't work for you. This is for care partners. Who are caring for someone in a more moderate stage of Alzheimer's or another type of dementia. It's a 3-week series, 2 hours a week. You'll meet other care partners just like you and get some really, really valuable tips and strategies. It's kind of like the things that we talk about here, but just magnified even more, and being able to share your story in a more kind of intimate setting. So we really we always hear good things about this class, and it's a nationally acclaimed class. It's curriculum that comes from many years of research and practice. So, and then Kim will be leading a series we call Living Well with Early Memory Loss. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that is?
Sure. This is a class that's designed for people who have just received a diagnosis of either mild cognitive impairment or Alzheimer's disease or another type of memory impairment. They attend on Zoom with their care partner, some type of significant other. So, and that's again, like Savvy, it's a 3-week course. And so if you know someone who's just received the news and would like to learn more about what lies ahead and learn about some coping strategies, some healthy, some strategies for living well with memory impairment, then they can contact us and learn more about that and register for September.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're just wrapping up here. Thank you all again so much for being with us today. Really enjoyed seeing familiar faces and hearing comments from you guys. Always love it, so don't stop. We have our helpline as always. You're here with us on Facebook. Visit our website for upcoming classes. And we want to, as always, thank our wonderful sponsor, Caring Companions at Home. Again, caringcompanionsAtHome.com. Or they have a Facebook. I tagged them in one of the comments. So if you're in need of those services, they're a great partner of ours. So thank you, Kim.
Oh, my pleasure. It was great to be here today with all of you. Thanks for inviting me, Melissa.
You're always invited. Open invitation. All right. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.